Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Dennis, for your service. David G., alcoholic, lust addict, sex addict from Oklahoma. Grateful for a recovery date in Alcoholics Anonymous of August 8th, 1994. And very grateful for a recovery date in the SA Fellowship of October 1st, 2019. Really good to be here with you guys tonight. We've been studying the book for a long while now and very in depth. It's been a great study. So grateful to have been a part of this. Thank you guys for coming out each and every week. We've been looking pretty closely at self and how it manifests in various ways to defeat us. We've always thought it's been drugs. We thought it's been alcohol. We thought it's been lust, sex, food, whatever it may be. But when we've looked underneath what lies underneath all of that, we see that that's really just the effect. It's nowhere close to being the cause. And that's why I kept running around and I kept trying to overcome something that I'd already overcome with drugs and alcohol. But I just couldn't overcome sex and lust, and I didn't understand why. And I'd worked the steps the same way the steps had been worked with me to overcome drugs and alcohol, but I wasn't getting any relief. Well, self began to tell me that I was different. I was never going to be able to get better, that, you're just a shameful, dirty person. All of these crazy ideas, notions that self comes up with, feeds into my mind. I believe it and take action on it, and I keep repeating the same behaviors over and over, wondering why nothing's ever changing. So this last time in coming through the work, I really discovered in 2019 and 2020 what the trouble really was. But it was in probably the end of 2020 and the first part of 21 that I had an experience from self that freed me. And it was unbelievable. For the first time in my life, I could see things in this book that I was never able to see before. And I've studied it with some of the best that there is to study it with, Charlie, of Joe and Charlie, the people that were connected to the Pritts and all of that. And I mean, it's good to come in and get great inspiration from the book, but if we don't really have an experience with this, it's kind of useless. I mean, knowledge is a great thing, but as it tells us on page 23 of this book, it's worthless. It's just, for people like us, it's never going to last. So when I got to chapter 7, going through the work this time, I was expecting to stop right there because that's what I'd always done. But he kept reading with me and reading with me and reading with me all the way through this. And really, what I discovered, self plays a big part in a lot of these stories in the back. And we've been picking that out piece by piece each week as we go through this book. And that's going to be no different tonight. We're going to see it again and again and again, all the way to the end. Because and I think I've mentioned this before, I was talking with my buddy Jason from San Diego one day, and we were having a conversation. He was telling me about a movie, and I think the movie was called A Beautiful Mind, and this man ended up at the end having an experience from self, so he was talking to self. And he said this. He said, I've come to realize that I'm never, ever, ever going to be able to shut you up. Never. He said, but you can bet that we've had the last conversation that we're ever going to have. And that's powerful. That's a powerful statement. Because if I don't talk to self and I don't listen to self and I don't react to self, then I don't have the same experiences anymore. Step 10 has been a wonderful, wonderful tool with that. But without going through the rest of this work, step 10, it just doesn't stick. So starting at 10 and going through the process the way we do, we've seen many, many, many addicts begin to recover from this and have an experience from self. So we're going to pick up on page 145 tonight. We're in the middle of the page, or at least that's where I'm going to start. And it says this: if he speaks of his home situation, you can undoubtedly make helpful suggestions. No need to try to tell him what to do. If you suggest, he's going to have a better attitude about it. Can he talk frankly with you, so long as he does not bear tales or criticize his associates? So when we look at that, bearing business tales, this reminds me a lot of the fellowship. You will hear me talk about other things other than just the chapter to the employers. A lot of times in meetings, that's exactly what we do. We tell tales, we tell all these stories, this guy's doing this, but this one's not doing that. And we criticize kind of the same way he's talking about here. So we know that stories tells, business tells, or he says criticize associates. Both of those are manifestations of self. That's not the cause, that's the effect. The cause is self. Once I listen to those things in my mind and I take action on them, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to tell tales. I'm going to begin to criticize people. That's just kind of my nature. But with this kind of employee, such an attitude will command undying loyalty. The greatest enemies of us alcoholics are resentment, jealousy, envy, frustration, and fear. I thought it was booze. I thought it was sex. I thought it was lust. I thought it was food. I thought those were the greatest enemies. But what I'm reading here, it says no. When you go under all of that, you're going to see what caused it to begin with. So resentment is closely related, but it's not the same as anger. Now, I know the book says that we make a list of anger, the people whom we've been angry. Resentment is really negative feelings. Key word right here, feelings. It's perceived as past wrongs, real or perceived. The old feelings connect to anger. Watch for memories. Because when resentment arises, it connects to an old memory of something, and that's when the anger comes in. So there is a difference between those two. Not a lot, but there is. Envy, a feeling. There it is again, feeling. Remember, self is made up of feelings, attitudes, concepts, beliefs, ideas. Envy is a feeling of being disconnected. It's perceiving false about us and about others. And so jealousy, oh my gosh, we could go on and on for days about that. Frustration, wow, that's a feeling of being upset or annoyed because I think you've done something to me. But really what I see whenever I dig into this word deeply, it's not what you've done to me, it's how I've reacted to what you've done to me. If you've said something that has affected my self-esteem, and I take that personally, and I attack you because you attacked me, then I'm responding to an emotion with an emotion. See, it's not you. I could take your name off of that inventory and put anybody's name on there I wanted. The outcome would be the same. It's not the person. It's not column 1. It's not column 2. It's column 3. And the way that we go through this work and do that is very, very enlightening, to say the least, and painful as well. So, fear is just an unpleasant emotion caused by self. It's mental anxiety, and we call it fear. And so that's what the book is saying. These are our greatest enemies. We've got to watch out. It's all connected to a feeling. So the book says here, wherever men are gathered together in business, there will be rivalry. And notice these 4 words, arising out of these. If you'll hold your place for just a second right there and go back with me to page 62 for just a second. We're going to see where these feelings arise from. The book's pretty specific about this. Let's see, that'd be the second full paragraph on page 62. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. Now, I will have to have had a spiritual experience by now to even begin to think that my troubles are basically of my own making, because up till now, I've always thought my troubles was because of you or them or someone else. But look what he says. They arise out of, and if you cross that word "our" out of that, take the S off the very end of it, it's going to leave the word self. So they arise out of self. The alcoholic is the extreme example of self-will, small s, run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. And it's the same thing back over here on page 145. Notice how it keeps connecting back to what we've already looked at. It says a certain amount of office politics. We alcoholics have a, watch this word, idea. Self is made up of concepts, beliefs, ideas, attitudes, emotions. So we have this idea that people are trying to pull us down. Often this isn't so at all. Of course it's not. How can they do that? If I don't react to what's going on, I don't play any kind of part in that. I'm not a victim here anymore. For so long, I thought I was. And as long as I'm the victim, there will never be a solution for me, because until you straighten up, I'll never be any better. And I don't have the power to make that happen. So often this is not so at all, but sometimes our drinking will be used politically. One instance comes to mind, which a malicious individual was always making friendly little jokes about an alcoholic's drinking exploits. In this way, he was, look how self is ruling him here. He thinks it's him, but he's responding to the idea same as we do. He was slyly carrying tales. In another case, an alcoholic was sent to the hospital for treatment. Only a few knew of it at first, but within a short time, it was billboarded throughout the entire company. Naturally, this sort of thing decreased the man's chance of recovery, and the employer can many times protect the victim. Another one of the few times the book's going to say anything about us being a victim, drunk or sober, from this kind of talk. The employer cannot play favorites, but he can always defend a man from needless provocation and keywords, unfair criticism. That's all self. Well, as a class, alcoholics are energetic people. Boy, I find that to be true. So true. They work hard and they play hard, and sometimes we get in a lot of trouble. We play so hard. Your man should be on his mettle to make good. We know when we come through the program of action and we make it to our 9th step that we're not looking to run around and say we're sorry all day long. We're looking to make right the wrong. We're looking to make good. So when I'm making amends, I usually do it like this. For one thing, I know that I was wrong. I need you to know that I know that I was wrong. And I'm willing to set that right in any way possible. As long as you're not asking me to do anything illegal or immoral, I stand ready to make that amend right now. And that is the way that I was taught to make amends. That's the way I've always made amends. And that's the way I'm always going to continue to make amends. Because it's not about just me saying I'm sorry. Although that is a sincere apology is necessary. Don't get me wrong. But it's more about righting the wrong. So being somewhat weakened and faced with physical and, key words here, mental readjustment to a life which knows no alcohol. Can't blame it on alcohol anymore. Can't blame it on drugs anymore. Can't blame it on lust anymore. Can't blame it on God anymore. There's only one thing left to blame, and that's not me. That's self, and I am not the self. He may overdo. You may have to curb his desire to work 16 hours a day. I've never had to have a boss do that for me, honestly. You may need to encourage him to play once in a while. I've never had to have anybody do that for me. I'm pretty good at all that. Sometimes too much. He may wish to do a lot for other alcoholics, and something of the sort may come up during business hours. A reasonable amount of latitude will be helpful. This work, keywords, that's what we do here, is this work. We see this over and over throughout our book. This work is necessary to maintain his sobriety. But for me today, more important is that is to lead me to an experience with spirit where I can recover from self. So after your man has gone along without drinking for a few months, you may be able to make use of his service with other employees who give you the alcoholic runaround, provided, of course, they are willing to have a third party in the picture. We do this with our sponsees. In any group that I've ever been a part of, once I find out what the man's skills are and what he does and what he can do, we take and we turn that to be of service of the group. There's many people sitting on this meeting right here tonight that do that and have done that and continue to do that. And I promise you this meeting would not have been where it's at today without them. And, at first, of course, all of the credit goes to God. But after that, there are some other people, I just show up and talk every week. So, we know who does the work here. So an alcoholic who has recovered. Now, we're not talking from drinking here. We're talking about recovered from self. What drove him to drink to begin with, what drove him to drug, lust, sex, food, whatever it is. We're assuming that he's recovered from that, especially by this time, this far back in the book. But holds a relatively unimportant job, can talk to a man with a better position. See, I think every job is important. Without the jobs that they call less important, there would be no more important jobs. My dispatcher, his position may seem better than mine, but I promise you he wouldn't have anything to dispatch if I didn't drive a truck or other people like me didn't drive a truck. So everybody plays a part in that. So He can talk to a man in a better position. Now, being on a radically different basis of life. Now, we're assuming, of course, he's had a spiritual experience here. He will never take advantage of the situation. If he hasn't, you can bet he'll take advantage of the situation every single time, or at least that's been my experience. Your man may be trusted. Long experience with alcoholic excuses naturally arouses suspicion. Of course it would. Why would it not? When his wife next calls saying he's sick, you might jump to the conclusion he's drunk. Well, why not? If he's been drunk all this time, just because he went to rehab and got sober for a little bit, doesn't mean that my trust is completely in him yet, or him and me. If he is and he's still trying to recover, I love this right here. He says he will tell you about it, even if it means the loss of his job. Let's hold our place and take a run over to page 79 for just a second. I think it's 79. Second paragraph. Although these reparations take innumerable form, there are some general principles which we find guiding. Reminding ourselves that we have decided, sounds like a decision there, to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. See, not just sobriety. We ask, anytime I see those two words in this book, that means prayer. We ask that we be given the strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. We may lose our position. Here it is. Our reputation or face jail, but we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. And if I do that, then I'm running from something that inevitably I'm always going to have to come back and face. Always. And I did that for so many years. When I came back through this work in 2019, you wouldn't believe the amount of amends that was left undone from all the way back then, not counting all the ones that I'd built on top of it. I had quite the list there, quite the list. So I love when it says that, mental readjustment to a life that knows no alcohol. So that's what we're talking about. So he must be honest. He knows. He knows. And for me to know something like what he's fixing to talk about here, that has to come from spirit. It has to. If you remember Jim's story all the way back on there, what is that, page 35, he talks about he knew he faced another trip to the salt. He knew he knew all these things. He ended up doing it anyway. But over here, we're on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. So our book says here, for he knows he must be honest if he would live at all. For so long, I would read that and think, well, if, the opposite of living is dying. So if I don't tell the truth, I'm going to die. No, that's not what it's saying, but I'm going to die somewhat inwardly. And that's a living death. That's hell. Many of us on here already know what that's all about. So he will appreciate knowing that you're not bothering your head about it, and that you're not suspicious, and that you're not trying to run his life, so that he will be shielded from temptation to drink. If you remember back on page 101, and I cross-reference a lot. Some people say, man, why do you do that so much? Well, because I'm leading. I'm the one speaking. That's why I do it. But I think it's very important that we remember these things. We meet these conditions every day. An alcoholic who cannot meet them, or a sexaholic still has an alcoholic or sexaholic mind. There's something the matter with his spiritual status. His only chance for sobriety to be someplace like the Greenland ice cap. And even there, an Eskimo might turn up with a bottle of scotch and run the whole thing. So this is really important information, because the very next paragraph, if you read on down from there on page 101, says this: in our belief, any scheme of combating alcoholism, sexaholism, drug addiction, food addiction, which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation, is doomed to failure. And I pay close attention to this with the people I sponsor. I've had guys show up and tell me my last sponsor had a filter on his phone, and every time I click on the internet, he gets an alert and he calls me, and I'm like, I'm not here to babysit you, dude. Either you're willing to do this or you're not. And if you're not, now's a good time to find out, because I'm not going to do any of that. Any attempt, which proceeds to shield the sick man from temptation, is doomed to failure. If the alcoholic tries, he may succeed for a time, but he usually winds up in a bigger explosion than ever. We've tried these methods, these attempts to do the impossible, and it's always failed. So that's why I want to connect back and forth, is because I need to remember this stuff, and I want self will let me forget it. So in case he does stumble even once, you'll have to decide whether to let him go. If you're sure he doesn't mean business, there's no doubt you should discharge him. I mean, same way with the sponsee. If, on the contrary, you're sure he is doing his utmost, you may wish to give him another chance. When I look at this from a sponsee standpoint, as long as they're willing to come back and do step 10 the way that we do it, they're willing to continue to send me the nightly reviews the way that we ask it to be done here. As long as you're willing to continue to go to big book step study meetings and call me once a day and start building a corral around that beast so that we can get some days behind it, then I'm more than willing to keep that person on and try. But if not, I have no problem with turning them loose immediately. It's a waste of time. My book tells me that over and over and over. If, on the contrary, like it says, he's doing his utmost, then give him a chance. But you should feel under no obligation to keep him on, for your obligation has well been discharged already. There's another thing that you might wish to do. If your organization is a large one, your junior executives might be provided with this book. You might let them know that you have no quarrel with the alcoholics of your organization, because that's probably the first thing they're going to think. These juniors are often in a difficult position. Men under them are frequently their friends, so for one reason or another, they cover these men. I worked in the oil and natural gas business for a long time, and I promise you that's what we do. We have each other's back. I don't care what you did, and I don't care how many times you did it and how dishonest it was. We always, always have each other's back. And that's sometimes not a good thing. It caused many of us to stay sick long beyond the point that we needed to. So hoping matters will take a turn for the better. A lot of people are like that with us. They often jeopardize their own positions trying to be helpful. When a man does that for me, I'm not really caring about his family. I'm not really caring about any of that. He's there to make a living for them. I don't care about that. I just need him to cover me so that I don't get caught. That's nothing but self all the way around. So serious drinkers who should have been fired a long time ago, or else given an opportunity to get well. After reading this book, a junior executive can go to such a man and say approximately this: look here, Ed, do you want to stop drinking or not? That's kind of the question that we ask them. If you remember off of page 90, the interview process, before I ever raised my hand to sponsor a man, that's one of the questions in that paragraph. Do you want to stop, and are you willing to go to any lengths to do so? And if the man says yes, then I begin to ask a series of questions that's laid out in that paragraph. But this is what it looks like for this man. You put me on the spot every time you get drunk or you act out or whatever it is. It isn't fair to me or the firm. I've been learning something about alcoholism. If you are an alcoholic, you're a mighty sick man, drunk or sober. You're mighty sick. And it's like he says, you act like one. It's always the thought and then the action, the thought and then the action. Every action is more than thought. That's why when we get to step 3, we turn our will and life over to the care of God. Our will is our thought, and our life is our actions. That's what we're turning over to God. We're not giving anything to God. We're turning over to God the way I think and the way I act, because that's what's wrong with me to begin with. And I have to drink, I have to drug, I have to act out to cover up those feelings. And so it says the firm wants to help you to get over it. And if you're interested, there's a way out. Man, what a promise. What a promise right there. There's a way out. I needed to hear those words. Let's hold our place right there and run over to page 17 for just a second. Let's go to the bottom paragraph on page 17. The book says this: the tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out. There it is again. I learned this early on. I didn't have to read all the way over to page 147 to see this. I knew right here, on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. That's the great news. The book, not the fellowship, not the meetings. And as important as that is, don't get me wrong, but that's the great news. The book carries to those who suffer from sexaholism, alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever the ism may be. Powerful, powerful readings here. And so many times I would just skim over these chapters, maybe reading the meeting once in a while. I never took time to study this and try to apply it to my own life. Guarantee I do today. Guaranteed. Look what he says. If you take it, your past to be forgotten. That's the same thing that we do in our inventory work. We learn in the Sick Man's Prayer on page 67, there's an exercise that we do going through this process, the Big Book Step Study. And you have to take time to stop and pray that list. No one ever showed me that. 25 years, nobody ever showed me that. Went through the book with, like I said, some of the best. No one ever showed me that. That's just a prayer you kind of use here and there, right? No, it's not. That's a whole series of work right there that we do. Because if I don't do that, what's going to happen is I'm going to hold on to some of that stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and move through the rest of the process. And when I get up so far, those things are going to come back to visit me and talk at me a little bit here and a little bit there. And the next thing you know, why? Because I haven't completely forgiven and I hadn't completely forgotten. And so all of that has to be wiped out right there in that prayer work before I'll ever let a man go into the turnarounds. He has to be completely free of that. People say that's not possible. Yeah, it is. That's putting a limit on God if I say that's not possible, because that's very much possible. And if we don't, it's a block to our spiritual experience. And, worst case scenario, we get drunk or act out again. So he says, but if you cannot or will not stop drinking, then I think you ought to resign. That'd be the noble thing to do. But us alcoholics, addicts, we don't like doing that kind of stuff. They're going to have to fire us so I can draw unemployment. You know what I mean? If I quit, I can't draw. Self's always talking to me. So your junior executive may not agree with the contents of our book. It doesn't matter whether he does or not. He need not and often should not show it to his alcoholic prospect, but at least he'll understand the problem and will no longer be misled by ordinary promises. The problem is not alcohol. The problem is not drug. The problem is not lust. If that's the problem, just don't do it anymore, and there shouldn't be any more problem, right? But every time I stop, another problem shows up, and I'm pissed off, and I'm angry, and I'm hurt, and all these feelings are rushing in on me. This is the problem. The problem is self. Self is the cause. Drugs, alcohol, sex, lust, food. That's the effect. We were always trying to change the effect. Go after the cause. You get the cause, there will be no effect. There just won't. The book promises it over and over and over. So at least he'll understand the problem, will no longer be misled by ordinary promises. He'll be able to take a position with such a man which is intimately fair and square. He will have no further reason for covering up an alcoholic employee. Why? We don't need to. Either that man's accountable for his actions or he's not. And if he's not, then he needs to go. Same as me. It boils right down to this. No man should be fired just because he's an alcoholic. If he wants to stop, keywords right there. If he wants to, it keeps coming back to that over and over. He should be afforded a real chance. We're not talking about just getting sober here. Of course, that's the beginning. But we're talking over and over and over, and I can't say it enough about recovering from self. He should be afforded that chance. If he cannot or he does not want to stop, and our book talks about that type of a person on page 58. It said those that do not recover. And if you don't recover here, there's only one other option. You die. There's two classes of people. It's those that cannot, and there's those that will not completely give themselves to this simple program. And that's the same thing as saying here. If he cannot or he does not want to stop, he should be discharged. The exceptions are few. We think this method of approach will accomplish several things. One, it will permit the rehabilitation of good men. That's a pretty good reason as far as I'm concerned. Two, at the same time, you will feel, keyword, no reluctance to rid yourself of those who cannot or will not stop. I used to not feel that way. I had to try to help everybody that came along. No matter who they was, no matter what it was, whether they wanted to stop or not, I was going to get them sober. I don't have that kind of power. Never did. Alcoholism may be causing your organization considerable damage in its waste of time, men, reputation. We hope our suggestions will help you plug up the sometimes serious leaks. We think we are sensible when we urge that you stop this waste and give your worthwhile man a chance. The other day, an approach was made to the vice president of large industrial concern. He remarked, "I'm mighty glad that you fellas got over drinking, but the policy of this company is not to interfere with the habits of the employees. If a man drinks so much that his job suffers, we fire him." And that's kind of how it was with the people I work for. I don't see how you can be any help to us, for as you see, we don't have an alcoholic problem. But here's what lies on the other side of this that people don't ever think about. The same company spends millions for research every year. The cost of their production is figured to a fine decimal point. They have recreational facilities, there's company insurance, and there's a real interest, both humanitarian and business, in the well-being of employees. But alcoholism, well, they just don't believe they have it. And that's the reason. Perhaps this is a typical attitude. He's going to explain why that is here. We who have collectively seen a great deal of business life, at least from the alcoholic angle, had to smile at this gentleman's sincere opinion. He might be shocked if he knew how much alcoholism is costing his organization. See, we're not talking about drinking. I mean, of course the guys are drunk, but when they stop drinking, how productive are they? Hell, if my mind is wanting to drink all the time, you really think, or if I want to act out all the time, you really think that I'm going to be giving 100% to my job, whether I'm drinking or acting out or not? I guarantee I'm not. I promise you I won't be. I will be doing everything but that, and I'll be charging them money for it. I had to look at that in my amends. I owed a hell of a lot of money, a hell of a lot, and still do. So he might be shocked if he knew how much it was costing, his organization a year. That company may harbor many actual or potential alcoholics. We believe the managers of large enterprises often have little idea, keyword, how prevalent the problem is. How can you know? We're blinded to it as alcoholics. I can guarantee you people who aren't alcoholics are blinded to it. Even if you feel your organization has no alcoholic problem, it might pay to take another look down the line, because you might make some interesting discoveries. Of course, we're going to see all kinds of behaviors connected to that once the drinking is gone. Of course, this chapter refers to alcoholics, sick, and deranged men, whether we're drinking or not. That's not only talking about when we drink. That's talking about when we're sober. I'm a lie. Just because I got sober didn't mean I quit lying. Didn't mean I quit cheating, and it didn't mean that I quit doing a lot of things that I did. It took a lot of years of good mental beatings while sober, quote unquote, sober, for me to get to the place in my life to where I really had to take an honest look at these things and become willing to face them. It really did. So what our friend, the vice president, had in mind was and this is very important, habitual or whoopee drinker. See, he wasn't looking at the real alcoholic. He's thinking, hey, I'll fire this guy. Either he loves his job or he don't. And if he don't, then he's gone. I promise you, I don't care how much I love my job. Self loves me more. And it's going to hold me in a position to where I'm going to do what it says. It has become my God without me even knowing it. I pray to it. I obey it. I worship it. I do everything it tells me to do. Crazy when we come through this work and we begin to see that. You get into the chapter, We Agnostic, start looking at that word reason with a capital R on it. And I promise you, that's going to be an eye-opening experience for you. So, alcoholic, sick, and deranged men. As to them, his policy is undoubtedly sound, but he did not distinguish between such people and the alcoholic. Remember, it talks about this on page 19 and 20 of the book, very in depth. It is not to be expected that the alcoholic employee will receive a disproportionate amount of time and attention. He should not be made a favor. The right kind of man, the kind who recovers. There's a lot of us men sitting on here like that today, thank God. We won't want that sort of thing. I promise you, that's all I ever wanted before. But I don't want that now. And it's the same way in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's the same way in all the conference speaking that I still yet do even to this day. I don't really care about doing that so much anymore. I'll do it if I'm asked, but I back away from that more and more and more all the time. I don't take on every guy that comes down the line to sponsor anymore. I pass them around to other people who are qualified to do the same. The right kind of man, the kind who recovers, he don't want that sort of thing. He will not impose. See, that's all self is, imposition of self. If you read on page 53 of the book, it says crushed by a self-imposed crisis. And see, I always thought that was talking about me. I imposed this crisis. That's talking about the imposition of self, and that's the same thing he's talking about right here. He will not impose. Of course he won't. He's not suffering from that anymore. Far from it. He will work like the devil and thank you to his dying day. So Hank says this, today I own a little company. There are 2 alcoholic employees. This was Bill W. and a man named Fritz M. Those are the 2 employees he's talking about. If you read the front of this chapter, he was one of the presidents of the largest companies of that time. It employed 6,600 men, if you remember. He's now down to 2. We get humbled along the way, don't we? So it says, who produce as much as 5 normal salesmen, but why not? They have a new attitude. Let's hold it right there for a second and run back to page 72 in the book. So after we've finished up this long inventory that a lot of us have been through here, our book says, having made that, what shall we do about it? Well, here's what we've been trying to do as a result of doing all that work. We've been trying to get a new attitude. See, that's what's wrong. Remember, self is attitudes, concepts, beliefs, all that stuff, conceptions. A new relationship with our Creator. It doesn't say that we didn't have a proper attitude by now, or even somewhat of a relationship with our Creator. It just says that we're trying to get a new one. And that's the same thing it's talking about over there on page 150. They have a new attitude. And look at this. They've been saved from a living death. Man, that's powerful. I don't know about you guys, but I just don't read that and think, wow, that's pretty cool. No, by God, that's what happened, because I was dying and living inside of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous for 25 years with a facade that I'm okay, I'm this, I'm that, all this. I had not a clue that I was dying inwardly the whole time. I mean, I had a clue, but not a clue as to how it turned out. I have been saved from a living death here, and I don't know about you, but I jump up and down with joy and give God all the credit for that. Absolutely. Well, I'm not going to agree with him right here again. I didn't agree with him at the beginning, and I don't agree with him at the end. I've enjoyed every moment spent in getting them straightened out. That's what it'd be like me sitting here. I've enjoyed every minute getting old Dennis T straightened out over there. Glad it worked. You know what I mean? That was his willingness and God, because I promise you, had it been me and Dennis, the odds would have been against us. And I guarantee you, we'd have both failed. But because of the grace of a loving God, the way that he showed up in our life, and the work that we done here, the work that he done, there's a miracle sitting there. There's another one there with Ash. I mean, I see them all over this, everywhere, all up and down through here. So notice it has a little asterisk there. So let's look at the footnote at the bottom. See Appendix 5. We shall be happy to hear from you if we can be of help. So it's been great. It's been great studying that chapter. There's a lot of good stuff in there that a lot of people don't really take time to look at. This next chapter is going to be no different. There's a lot of history in this next chapter, a lot. So I hope you guys come back out and join us. Like she said, we won't be here next week, but the week after that, we'll be back and we'll be looking at going to the end of this. We will go to page 164, and that'll complete the study, which will be about another probably 4 weeks. So how many ever weeks we are now, plus 4 more, it's been over 40 weeks. It's been a great year to be in recovery. So thanks for letting me share. I'm really glad to be here tonight.
This concludes David's share on tonight's chapter, but we encourage you to keep listening as he answers questions from the audience and shares additional experience, strength, and hope.
I have a quick question, David, on 149. I've read this before, but just somehow never noticed it, about the habitual or whoopee drinker. I assume they're talking about the real alcoholic with the habitual, but I've just not heard the whoopee drinker. Is that like the garden variety?
The habitual drinker is somebody that has a habit. Habitual. You know, the book talks about that. In fact, I'd made reference to it, but let's just take a quick minute. We'll take a run over there and take a look at it. And I know you all know where this is at. I mean, you guys have been around for a while, most of you. So we're talking about the real alcoholic. So let's take a look at the bottom of page 20 in our book. Page 20, bottom of the paragraph and on that page says this: then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit. That's connected to that word habitual. Badly enough to gradually impair him mentally and physically. But look at the top of the paragraph there. Moderate drinkers, this is what we would call a whoopee drinker here in Oklahoma. They have little trouble in giving it up. They can take it or leave it alone. And for me, I can't take it or leave it alone, either one. This man has a choice, though, and so does number 2. And so that's what it's talking about there when it talks about the habitual. I mean, they can get pretty bad, there's no doubt. But for some reason, the book says that ill health, falling in love, change of environment. The difference is we have the allergy. They don't. They have the obsession. But once it gets bad enough, they're able to pull away from that and stop. Most of us can't do that, whether we're sexaholics or whatever it may be. We can't do that. We have every intention on doing that, but we just can't seem to do that. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. I had heard the whoopee parties, just didn't remember the whoopee drinker.
Yeah, this whole chapter is just really filled with principles about how to deal with the addict, with sponsee. It's really from the point of view. What it's really telling me is if a man cannot or will not, that I have to be willing to let him go. My default coming into this program was to try and save people. And I didn't realize that was just another attempt on my self's will to play God. And I got to the point where really, and like David said earlier, it's between the man and God. And I'm there just to guide him, but I'm not there to do the work for him or push him on. And the one part I liked here on page 146, it says, he may wish to do a lot for other alcoholics. And that's now the sponsor or somebody that has some recovery that wants to work. And it does say that this work is necessary to maintain his sobriety. But at some point, and I know in the beginning, I put a whole lot of work into doing the work, working with others. But something that David helped me with as well is that we have to curb his desire to work 16 hours a day. You may need to encourage him to play once in a while. And the purpose that really was from that is that I can start regaining life, that I can start taking back my life. And recovery is important. I get to do it. I don't have to do it, but I get to do it. Well, I have to do it as well. But the attitude is differently. But I really have scaled back so that I too can start to live life and start to regain my life. And it's not all about working with others, but it gives me a point to live happy, joyous, and free. And that means to have relationship outside of recovery and to garner those. And I think that's exactly what this book is trying to help us do. It's not enough to get sober if we're not making our relationships with our family, if there's not a healing there. We really have to do the whole program. And I'll pass with that. And thank you, David, for your help. I appreciate it, brother.
I mean, gosh, it's just been such a remarkable relationship we've had ever since the first day I ever met him. And, I was speaking at a group and he was there, and it's kind of just went from there. We've done a few of these studies together now like this. And, but I loved what he said. The man may wish to do a lot for other alcoholics, and that's a great thing. But if I look at this in the part of go to meetings all the time, be there all day long, you have to sometimes get them to scale back just a little bit like he was talking about. But many of you know, because it happened during this study, I got really sick last year, and I didn't know whether I was going to make it or not for the first time in my life. And I faced death a lot of times, trust me. But, that was something inward I didn't have any control over. And I mean, there was like 5.5 months. There was almost a half a year that I went through that. And I mean, we thought it was my heart. We thought it was my lungs. We thought it was this. All that stuff kept checking out. And I kept thinking, hell, I know I'm crazy, but I mean, this can't be craziness, And so anyway, long story short, during that time, I had a lot of time to reflect. And one of the things that I was doing, that I was sponsoring over 30 men in this work through this book. In an 8-hour day, I drive a semi, and I have a lot of highway time, so that gives me a lot of time to talk. I had a different man every hour, on the hour, every day of the week, all week, 40 to 50 hours in my week, how many ever hours I worked, went to working with others. And what happens when I do that is I hear a lot of stuff and I suppress a lot of stuff from other addicts and alcoholics. Well, I'm not venting any of this and I'm not letting it go. And what happens is that stuff starts piling up on me and it starts squeezing on me. And I just don't think it's healthy to do that. You know, that's all I'd ever been taught to do. You don't ever say no. You work with whoever comes along. I don't believe that anymore. That was one of those old beliefs I had to get over in here. And, you know, I think it's important that we help people get connected, do whatever we can to try to help them. But I promise you, I don't take a man, probably one man through this book now at a time, where I was taking 8 or 10. And so it's made life so much more peaceful. It's given me time at my home. It's allowed me to do what I love to do. You know, I love to fish. I love to do all these other things. Now I have time, you know, with my family, with my son. It's just, and with you guys, it's just been great. This is about balance. Like Dennis said, you know, in the beginning, yeah, it's absolutely necessary. I got to do whatever I got to do. But, you know, as time goes on, this is about living. And, you know, I was told that early on. So AA is not your life. It's a way of life. And they said it's a selfish program, but you got to quit being selfish. And I said, I don't understand that language at all. They said, well, let me make it simple for you. If anyone's got to drink and die, I hope it's you, not me. I was like, damn, that's a pretty serious statement right there. And he said, if you don't learn how to make balance out of this, you're never going to last here. And all those years later, I finally understood what he was saying. You know, we help whoever we can, however we can. But at the same time, we don't let our family suffer, our groups and our work and all that stuff. You know, I've got a living to make for my family, and I do that now. So anyway, enough of that. Thanks. Thank you, Dennis. I love you, man.
I love you too, brother. Thank you.
I just want to chime in to concur with what we've just heard. I know that I can use almost anything addictively, and especially early in my recovery, I avoided being at home because there were uncomfortable things at home I didn't want to face, I didn't want to confront, I didn't want to have to deal with, and it was just easier to stay at work late hours or go to meetings. You know, I can now that we have the Next Meeting app or website on our some fellowships, it's just easy to find Zoom or other types of meetings, and a person can literally go to meeting after meeting. And when I do that, I am avoiding something. And I also have always believed and haven't always acted on that belief, but I believe that my gift of recovery is so that I can have a life, so that I can live in relationships with my family members, people close to me, and be part of society, part of my community, and part of my family. And when I avoid all of those relationships because they're too hard or there's long time old bad feelings or something, that's not living free and sober. So I really appreciate the discussion today about balance because that really is important for my life as well. Thank you. Good to see you all.
I just want to say thank you, Miss Susan. It's so good to see you here, one of my best buddies in the world. I was so grateful to meet her in person and go to Miss Sylvia's 100th birthday in Oklahoma City, and I got to meet Susie in person, and man, I just loved it. We had a great time, and one of my best buddies. I mean, she's been around this ever since I've been here for sure, and even a long time before that. So always happy to see you, my friend. Always. Thanks.
Thank you. You too. Back at you, brother.